had the capacity to reach this planet?
Is that directed to me?
It is, yes.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm one of those who believes that the probability of life elsewhere in the universe is so high as to be a certainty. Secondly, that the probability that among such an unimaginable number of life forms, that some will be intelligent, is also close to certainty. That's a very different issue from the question of whether intelligent life forms visit us, let alone do such idiotic things as explore our reproductive systems. If an intelligent life form has the technological capacity to do all the other things that they've been claimed to do, why the hell do they have to abduct us? They surely have much better ways of getting whatever information they need. It's all highly implausible in respect of the behavior of these claimed beings. But I have no worry about the claim that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe.
Well, then just tell me this.
How any evidence?
Okay, well, just tell me this. How, then, do you explain this phenomenon? And Bud Hopkins believes that in the United States alone there are probably millions of abductees. And the phenomenon that I'm putting to you is that there are potentially millions of people who actually believe that they have been abducted. Now, how do you explain that phenomenon?
I explain it first superficially as a highly predictable characteristic of our species to have mass delusions and to believe in what is otherwise unbelievable. This isn't the first mass delusion. I remind you that in the Middle Ages, a very large fraction of the whole population of Europe not only believed in witches, but reported encounters with them, including sexual ones, and that tens of thousands of such witches were executed. So mass delusions are nothing unusual. That's a part of the way we are.
Jenny Randles, yes, Jenny Randles, I wanted to ask you, as I understand it, your position lies somewhere between these two. You're sceptical of these abduction claims, but you are a UFO investigator, which I assume means that you take them seriously.
Yes, I think you've got to accept that people are having genuine experiences, and therefore you need an explanation. And it doesn't help at all to sort of just dismiss them as delusions, because that is not solving a problem, it's just wishing it away. Therefore, you've got to actually get to grips with this and pose the real questions, which are not simple terms like, are these really visitors from space or is it just a delusion, but accept that there's a phenomenon and think what else it could be. You see, clearly, I think, from all the evidence, we're dealing with something that's actually an altered state of consciousness. Whatever triggers it in the first place, that's the form it takes. You can say that quite clearly for a number of reasons. For instance, there are cases of observed abductions. There was a good case in Victoria in Australia where someone believed that she was inside a UFO. She described exactly the experience that she was undergoing, but two other people were with her at the time and saw that she hadn't gone anywhere. And that is by no means unique. In those cases, that person who believes she's in a spaceship is actually in an altered state of consciousness, having some kind of experience. Moreover, you have this problem with the physical evidence, which, whilst not non-existent, is very hard to find. It's not like a situation of a bank robbery, where if a bank robbery happens, then you've got the evidence of the people inside the bank, you've got people outside who see the thieves get away in a getaway car, and you've also got the physical evidence of the money that's been taken from the bank. That's the kind of evidence you need in an abduction case to demonstrate that you're dealing with a physically real experience. Moreover, although Bud said that there was the situation of no effect from sociology or long-term effects. One of the problems is that the UFO phenomenon, the abduction phenomenon in particular, does change. For instance, in Britain, prior to about 1987, when Whitley Strieber's case occurred, all the aliens that were seen, or the vast majority of them, were of a type which we call the Nordics. They were 6.5 foot tall, they were blue-eyed, blonde-haired. They behaved completely differently from the types of Americans the aliens that they have in America. And this cultural difference has to be significant. But that's changed now because of this massive worldwide appeal of stories like Communion and Bud Hopkins' books and films. Suddenly in Britain, we've started to get a flood of aliens very similar to those in America. And the same sort of thing is happening in Australia, too, in recent cases. You can't dismiss that. That's relevant, surely, to an answer.
All right, but then what are you saying there? Because it sounds to me like you're suggesting that they are delusions, that people have seen a movie, it's formed a strong impression on them, and they've reacted accordingly.
Hello?
Yes,
Jenny Randles
are therefore not... Sorry.
Sorry, Jenny Randles, I think you lost me for a moment. Can you hear me?
Hello?
No, Jenny Randles. No, Jenny Randles has lost our sound for a moment, but...
is there anybody
May I make a comment on...
here?
Yes, Bud Hopkins.
I'd like to make a comment on this. First of all, this statement was made that there is no evidence. I would like to change this around to saying we have every kind of evidence one could possibly want except one kind. We do not have an object, and this is what science now, the skeptical scientists, insist upon. We do not have an object that all of science would agree could not have occurred or been manufactured on Earth. We have every other kind of evidence. We have eyewitnesses to abductions taking place. We have abductions involving, in one case, 7 people who are all telling mutually corroborative stories. If the craft comes down, it leaves a mark on the ground. It might break the tree branches down from the top as it comes down, as it settles there. The soil underneath the craft where it's landed has often been baked into a kind of rock-like hardness. The people have been taken, are absolutely missing. In many cases, the police have been called looking for them. When they return, excuse me, they may have someone else's clothes on, as if some kind of mistake was made in the craft. If these people, pardon me, were abducted and put in some kind of altered state and undressed and made to dress again.
But isn't one of the problems
evidence you can imagine?
But isn't one of the problems you've got that if your theories are correct, if your reports are correct, then there has to be a massive conspiracy by the world's governments, individually and collectively, over decades. Now that kind of conspiracy theory it does defy credulity, doesn't it?
We have a problem here, though. Everyone is trying to use their theories about what is or what is not possible to refute the data. No one's really talking about the investigations of what you get. I don't like these reports at all. I don't like to think in terms of conspiracy theories. No abductee I know really is pleased at having had these very, very traumatic experiences, and these people are suffering often from PTSD. We're stuck with the data, and it doesn't do to wave a theory in front of the data as, for instance, to say that such a conspiracy is impossible, therefore none of this can take place. We must investigate, no matter what the professor said. An extraordinary phenomenon demands an extraordinary investigation. And I was shocked to hear him say that he doesn't think it should be investigated. That's really quite
But you are talking
opposite
about
to the way science operates.
You are talking about millions of people over decades, but you're talking of millions of people in America alone.
I haven't mentioned millions.
But you've extrapolated, haven't you?
Certain assumptions were made in terms of probabilities based on one particular test, survey that was done, but I have never endorsed these numbers as absolute. We have no idea what the numbers are.
But even
and that's again not the problem.
Even if they're only hundreds.
The problem is
even if they're only
the
hundreds.
Problem, yes, and that's for sure.
Even if they're only hundreds, you would suggest that
there still has to be a conspiracy.
Because surely, I mean, just
sorry.
on the evidence, Bud Hopkins, on the evidence that you say is there, yet despite the evidence that's come from at least hundreds, if not thousands or millions of people, you're saying that governments are dismissing it.
Well, we don't know really exactly what is going on. We do know that there are government cover-ups in effect simply because, as is
from the experts who should know about its provenance, argue against it. But I think perhaps most importantly, the Roswell case is a very strong case. There is, I think, beyond any other case in UFO history, clear evidence that something happened. Of course, there's a very big difference between something happening and an extraterrestrial spaceship having crashed. But that's a viable theory, at least in this case, where it isn't in many others. But something undeniably did occur. And yet the evidence that we've been carefully accruing over the last 20 years doesn't match what's on this film. The witnesses say that the aliens look different, the wreckage itself is different from what's on here. So you have a little big problem. If this film is genuine, you really have to you have to junk most of what you've already discovered about the Roswell case, and really that's all that tells you that there was a Roswell case in the first place.
But aren't you also drawn to the theory that that the post-mortem was quite possibly on the body of somebody who had been mutated as a result of a radiation experiment?
The figure in the film itself is very human-like, rather more human-like than it ought to be. And I think what you've also got to remember, the problem here is we have to know whether this film really does date from 1947. That has not yet been thoroughly established. Assuming that it does, then I think it's pretty obvious that they could not have faked this scene using some sort of model that far ago. Consequently, you have to find out what it could be that could actually be performing a real autopsy on. And we know that the Americans were doing a lot of strange experiments in and around that time. They brought Nazi scientists over to build intercontinental ballistic missiles and the primitive space rocket technology, but the Nazi scientists were up to other pretty horrible things during World War II, and I don't think it's inconceivable that the Americans got mixed up in some of those, and if they did, of course, they'd definitely not want us to know about it.
Paul Gross, going back to the point, Paul Gross, that you were making before, that people have been open to delusion since the Middle Ages, or, well, perhaps since time began. But,
well before.
But I wonder, in an age which is supposed to be an age of great communication and of scientific enlightenment, does the fact that even so many people are reporting these incidents, that this, at least in your terms, must represent a failure by mainstream science to lead the world community on the realities as opposed to what you would regard as fantasies and false hopes?
Yes, it's a failure in that sense, but not a surprising one. The fraction of the human population that applies the rules of evidence such as they are, those rules that work, such as they've emerged in the past 350 years, to phenomena is very small. I don't think that fraction has changed very much. Our language changes. So it's not surprising to me that large numbers of people believe things that are either very unlikely or simply not true. But if I may say that my use of the word delusion was not meant as a statement of derogation. Jenny said, I believe, that one ought to explain the phenomenon, qua phenomenon, that lots of people believe something and that one oughtn't to be dismissive of. I'm not dismissive of it. Large numbers of people believing something that's patent nonsense to others is a phenomenon, and the usual term for it is mass delusion. That's not a derogation, it's a derogation of...
But Jenny,
the assumption of a delusion is that there's no evidence to back it up, and there clearly is evidence here of something beyond simple hallucination.
But Jenny,
what is the evidence?
Sorry, go on.
What's the evidence?
Well, I mean,
we're talking about the abductions now.
Well, I just listed some of the evidence.
You didn't. You didn't list any evidence.
Oh, I suppose. Well, an eyewitness account, of course, is not evidence.
I guess that would depend on the eyewitness.
Let's assume what's not evidence. No eyewitnesses count as evidence. If an object is asserted to have landed in a particular place, the fact that it's knocked down tree branches, left marks on the ground, and baked the soil is also not evidence. Right. The fact that eyewitnesses have observed this is not evidence. The fact that there are marks and cuts, deep gashes, in one case recently, a long cut on a little girl's chin in her sleep, scalpel-like and very shallow, but it took it took 80 stitches to close this. No pain and very little blood, connected with an abduction experience. That's not evidence either. Unfortunately, we have the same amount of evidence.
But who is examining this evidence? And if this evidence is serious, why isn't it being taken seriously by authorities? Who is examining this evidence, Bud Hopkins?
Well, okay. I just asked for the gentleman, Mr. Gross, is that the name?
Yeah,
I believe.
Correct.
I asked him about investigations, and he said there's no reason to investigate this. Science shouldn't bother with this, is what he was saying. And I'm saying that I did a program once with Dr. Carl Sagan, and I invited him. I said to come and look into a case with me. This isn't a question that he has to, an investigator has to share my assumptions about this. Let the person investigate.
Okay, well, let me, sorry.
Science is...
But we're out of time, but I'll just give Paul Gross one brief response.